So let's move on to the NFC South. New Orleans Saints.
New Orleans.
Speaking of having no cap space, they just don't have the flexibility now. We're assuming they're going to bring Breeze back, right?
Yeah.
Like Breeze said he's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
The Saints haven't officially brought him back, right?
No.
But he's coming back.
Well, so the only thing that would complicate that is if Sean Payton is in fact telling the truth with how absurdly enamored he is.
He's like, no, I love Taysom Hill. He's
Right.
Drew Brees plus.
Well, he's Steve Young.
He's
Steve
Steve.
Young the second. So
Which is Drew Brees with athleticism.
Right. I might trade a 41-year-old Drew Brees looking to come back for one last go-round at $1 million, billions of dollars. That is unlike Brady, right? Who consistently sort of takes a percentage off his deal for the extra slot receiver and just comes in below the market. Brees is like, no, just add inflation to whatever I was getting paid last year. Keep it ticking. Keep it going up. So every year they do this one more year thing. It gets more expensive for them effectively. But 41-year-old Drew Brees for a fortune, I might trade him for Steve Young. So, if that's what Sean Payton thinks, logically Taysom Hill should be the starting quarterback next year.
I'm gonna assume Brees is the quarterback. The all-inness of the Saints moves the last couple of years. They made the big move to go get Marcus Davenport a couple of years ago. So here's why it's got to be Brees last year, right? Because their 2017 draft class was so spectacular.
Yeah.
And two of them were first-round picks, so they're coming up in their fifth-year options. That's Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk. They had Alvin Kamara, and they have Marcus Williams in the secondary. Those four players, just an incredible haul for one draft.
Yeah.
And then the next year, the big trade-up for Marcus Davenport, good player, not worth all the picks, whatever. And then Eric McCoy, because of the Davenport trade, he was the only guy that they got last year in the early rounds, and he's a pretty good, solid center. I mean, they've brought some talented young players in that need to get signed in the future. My point on the 17 class is those guys need to get paid next year. So this has to be it, right?
Rookie deal quarterbacks give you a window, right, for a Super Bowl. When those guys hit and you're like, right, wow, we just found Russell Wilson. We're paying him nothing for the next few years. We have a window now to attack a Super Bowl, Mahomes, whatever. Those guys on their first year, they give you a window. Also, the other thing that gives you a window is if you have one of those draft classes where you just come away and you've nailed basically the entire thing. Seahawks again.
Seahawks did both, right? They had Wilson and those types of draft classes.
Right. So honestly, kind of underachieved for only winning the one ring.
Right.
Maybe you should have given the ball to Marshawn.
Wow.
But look, those two things give you a window. So the Saints have had a window now for the Super Bowl for a couple of years because of that 2017 draft class. But the reason it's a window and not just you're now in a great place on a run is because of what you're saying. At some point, those guys all collectively hit a renewed contract at the same time, and unless you were planning for that in terms of salary cap space and actually reserving a giant chunk of money to keep these guys paid for second contracts, you can't afford to make that happen. And the Saints have not been reserving space. In fact, they've been doing the opposite. They've been kicking the problem down the road because of Drew Brees taking up all their cap. So they can't do it. This is the last year for them to make a run.
So, every team goes into the offseason and it's like, all right, how are we going to get better, right? And then some teams, it's less sexy, but you got to do it. It's like, how do you just maintain status quo and say, okay, we're good enough, and, with the right breaks this year, maybe it can happen. I mean, that's kind of where the Saints are right now. In a perfect world, you'd have enough money to bring in maybe a speed threat to take Ted Ginn's spot and be the Ted Ginn role in that offense, right? Opposite Michael Thomas, and somebody that could stretch the field a little bit more. Perfect world, well, you definitely need a cornerback opposite Marshawn Lattimore. You've got Eli Apple and P.J. Williams both as free agents. Even if they were back, that has been the big question mark, much like Darius Slay in Detroit. Who's cornerback 2 over there? But you don't have the money, and you only have a first-round pick and a third-round pick, right? So, the Saints are just trying to, hold water here, right, for this offseason and say, okay, with Brees at the helm, with Michael Thomas to throw to, a good offensive line, a solid pass rush, and a couple anchors in the secondary, we're good enough here. Is that what we're looking at here for the Saints?
I mean, sort of. I think there's always a case of if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. So
I agree. I just don't. How are they going to do it?
Well, I think you do have some ammunition to. I mean, not salary cap wise, but you have some targets that you can get better. I think they do need that secondary threat opposite Michael Thomas because as much as everyone knows what Michael Thomas is doing, and he's still getting open and making catches every single play. that is great, but, let's give the guy some help. I think there are players out there that could do that. And, if you've got to wait until the third round and target like a KJ Hamler, who's got speed, who can go deep, who can do a lot of the sort of tricky underneath stuff in a way they don't really have anybody that can do right now. Kamara, I guess, from a different alignment out of the backfield. But, KJ Hamler, I think, would make a massive impact on that offense and is maybe a third-round pick that they could get as opposed to spending, first couple of rounds, given how good this wide receiver draft class is. I think there's targets they can have lower down.
I like that. So KJ Hamler, third round. First round, are they another team we throw the cornerback?
I think so, yeah. You've got to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, because again, value and need match up. It's a need for everybody anyway. So the Gladneys of the world, the Trevon Diggs of the world, maybe A.J. Terrell from Clemson. And if they came away with those guys, they've got a chance to kind of patch those holes. Andres Pete's a free agent at guard up front. You can kind of stitch that together everywhere else. But I think weapons for Breeze so they don't get into a situation where they're trying to get too gimmicky. Love Taysom Hill, but man, I don't think Taysom Hill gimmicks are carrying that team.
And I think all of these old quarterbacks, Breeze, Brady, Rivers, I think they've all reached a point in their careers where they need more help than they used to, right? All of those guys used to be able to get it all done by themselves. Brady dragging a group of no-name receivers to championships. Rivers playing in the face of zero offensive line help. Breeze has had his own issues, but I think all of those guys just need more help than you think they used to. So dial it up, give them receivers, even when you think, Breeze could have got it done with this group. Well, fair enough, but 41-year-old Breeze can't. So let's give him some more weapons.
All right, Carolina Panthers. Are we in full rebuild mode here, Sam? We're fixing the Panthers, and are we talking about a multi-year fix?
Yes. Everything is being blown up from the ground up. I mean, this roster, not just this roster, this franchise is being rebuilt, right? They are doing this whole thing from top to bottom. They're building new facilities. They are changing front office structures. They've changed personnel already in terms of coach, front office. This whole thing is being completely wiped clean and constructed from the foundations upwards, and I think that has to continue into the roster.
All right, you ready? You ready for the plan?
Okay.
Here's the Panthers' plan. We're going full. Trevor Lawrence is in. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields are in play.
Right.
Mode. I'm not going to even call it tanking. We're going to trade Cam Newton.
Okay.
We're going to roll with Kyle Allen / Will Grier. Kyle Allen, who showed some promise last year. Will Grier, who showed no promise last year.
No promise.
But Will Grier was a better college quarterback, had projected better at the NFL level. I'm going to roll with those guys. If I roll with those guys, chances are I'm not going to win many games. Or if I do, maybe I found a useful quarterback. Maybe not to build around, but to at least have an asset. Okay? So that's a strategy. Kyle Allen and Will Grier, it's your show. Christian McCaffrey, trading block. Christian McCaffrey's not a part of the rebuild.
Wow.
Buy into this. You just wrote about this. You just wrote about how running back contracts are never going to work, right?
Yeah. Second.
At the end of 2020, his fourth year is up. You have to pick up his fifth-year option. It's going to be big money. And then he hits free agency. If this is a 2, 3, 4-year rebuild in Carolina, is Christian McCaffrey a part of it?
So here's the thing, right? When you write a piece like that, that's like, hey, running backs are never worth giving a second contract to. Everyone's like, well, what about this guy? Like, everyone's looking for the exception, right? You're like, well, it's kind of the point, right? Stop looking for the exceptions. It reminds me, this is a topical thing these days, Steve. It reminds me of that medical aphorism, right? Where when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, right? It's the same idea, right? Yes, there might be an exception out there somewhere, right? Somewhere there is a unicorn that changes all these dynamics and is worth paying the big money to. But stop looking for it, because it probably isn't the guy you think it is, right? And that's, I think, where I would be with McCaffrey, right? McCaffrey might change the dynamic slightly because he's a phenomenal receiver. But again, there's an element of the Isaiah Simmons stuff to it, where in order to get the most value out of Christian McCaffrey, you have to deploy him in a way I don't think teams are prepared to deploy him, right? You actually need, if there is a gap in market efficiency with running backs and pass catching running backs, it is causing defenses matchup problems on a regular basis with those guys. So everyone one of the things thrown back is, well, what about the pass catching running backs? The pass game is more valuable than the run game, so pass catching running backs you should give second contracts to. Austin Eckler, James White, McCaffrey. The problem is that when you start looking into that, and Ben Baldwin from The Athletic has done this research, right? Targets to running backs are less valuable than targets to receivers or tight ends. Even when running backs are running wide receiver and tight end routes, that they're less efficient at catching them because they're running backs, right? They're not as good at receiver as those other guys. So the value might be there in theory, but the guy needs to be good enough for it to actually make a difference. McCaffrey might be one guy who is good enough to make that happen, but what you need to do in order to maximize that is to effectively make him a dual position player and say, you are half a wide receiver and half a running back, and we will decide on a play-to-play basis which one you're playing, because that is where you start to cause a defense a problem every single snap, because now they have to look at him in the huddle and say, well, what the hell is this? Is this 11 personnel? Is this 12 personnel? Like, what are we looking at here?
I've always thought that the receiver that can take running back carries, and
same idea, right?
Aaron Hernandez used to do this at tight end / wide receiver, and then he would go into the backfield and take a carry. That breaks defenses.
Yes.
So if you made McCaffrey a wide receiver who sometimes took backfield carries, after the defense starts treating him like a wide receiver, then the whole point of the run game being efficient that we say is it's box count and mismatches, and that actually dictates the box count for you.
The league started to do this with Aaron Hernandez and a couple other people. I thought that was where we were heading, and then it pulled back.
It was like Ryan Switzer in Pittsburgh did it. Like, it's random guys
Hernandez was a real smart thing, because initially your tight end was a mismatch because he was a dominant blocker and a good receiver, right? So Gronk broke the league because he could block like an offensive tackle and be a great pass catcher. Hernandez wasn't a good blocker at all, right? So at some point, teams were like, well, let's just treat him like a wide receiver. Let's match him up with a DB, and we're better. So then the Patriots went, oh, okay, let's force the same mismatch by actually giving him the ball, making him the running back. So now you force the same problem in terms of the DB is now outmatched by a blocker.
And you know all this, though? But then you run the no huddle. And on the no huddle, it's like he's literally lined up at tight end one play, wide receiver the next play, running back the next play. And when you have a quarterback able to handle all of that, then the guy who looks valuable is actually more valuable, in part because, again, it always comes back to the quarterback.
So there's like a couple of banks that I think could do this if teams embraced it. McCaffrey, Eckler is probably one of them. Ty Montgomery is another one who they almost did this, and then they gave his job to somebody else. But if you embrace that as an offense, the problem is I don't know if you can do that without essentially making that the focus of your offense. And if you do that, I don't know how effective.
And then it goes back to that point of you're taking away the value of wide receivers or tight ends or whatever it is.
In my mind, that's the potential market efficiency of a way running backs could be worth big money in a second contract. But I don't know if that's even practically a better way of doing it than just lining up in 11 personnel and giving the ball to a random rookie contract running back.
Here's the deal, though. His contract versus what Austin Eckler just signed for, I'm good with Austin Eckler's contract that they just signed. It was on the cheap.
Yeah.
And he has really been as valuable as he's a top 3 running back value over the last couple of years because of how unbelievable he's been in the pass game.
Yeah. And
as a runner.
He has been getting downfield targets. So his EPA on targets is one of the few players in terms of running backs that actually creeps up into where the top wide receivers are. So that makes sense. Now, whether you think that's sustainable is a different debate. But yes, Eckler at his contract, as opposed to McCaffrey, who's going to want Zeke money, is definitely a different conversation.
Yeah, so there we go.
So we didn't achieve anything there, right?
No, we did. They're rebuilding.
Okay.
Everywhere. So accumulate draft picks, roll with the 2 quarterbacks that are going to get you into. So this year's draft has to be treated the way the Dolphins did last year's.
So we're still throwing everything away at this point.
Trade Cam Newton.
Trade everything away.
Trade Cam for draft capital.
Yes.
Christian McCaffrey for draft capital. Trade down 1 million times in the draft. So you're sitting there a year from now, much like the Dolphins are, with a ton of draft capital, probably only a couple wins under your belt last year, and it's a complete overhaul.
Okay, so effectively, us fixing the Panthers this season is to destroy them in the most comprehensive way possible.
We never said we're fixing them for this season. We're just fixing them.
Okay.
based off their current situation.
So fixing the Panthers is we have to destroy to fix.
This also coincides with Breeze eventually leaving the Saints in that division, Matt Ryan getting older. Like, this makes the most sense.
We have to tear them down in order to build them back up.
That's what we're doing in Carolina.
We're tearing them down.
Speaking of Matt Ryan and the Falcons, we got to fix Matt Ryan and the Falcons.
Ugh.
So I fixed the bottom 10 offensive lines in the piece. And they were a bottom 10 offensive line. And the fix was just kind of like hope that they play better. hope that the young, like Chris Lindstrom played pretty well, only played about 300-something snaps. Caleb McGarry really struggled. We had him as more of a late second, early third round talent that they grabbed in the first round. So I think immediately that was a risky move. But offensive linemen develop later. Yep. So a part of this is just Lindstrom's going to play more, and he looks solid. And then you hope that McGarry develops. Alex Mack's still good. Jake Matthews is still good. If you have 3/5 of your offensive line good, like it's a decent enough starting spot. McGarry's got to creep back to an average, and then they have to figure out the right guards, left guard situation now. With yearly issue over there in Atlanta. So that's the O-line. I think like kind of hope and wait. I let Hooper walk for the reasons we've said earlier. And I don't know, you still just have the pieces in place offensively to make things happen as long as they give Matt Ryan a few more clean pockets per game. It's the defensive backfield, again, like many of these other teams, that needs a lot of help.
Defensive backfield, I think they could really use a slot receiver as well. I kind of like, obviously, Julio Jones spectacular. I think Ridley is versatile. I think he can move around inside and outside. I like a guy that can be a pure sort of slot guy in their 11 personnel groups. They're 3 wide situations. I don't know that there's a ton of those in free agency.
Like a Randall Cobb type. Does he have enough left to be productive there?
So the guy that's kind of intriguing to me in terms of, again, reclamation projects or cheaper options is Nelson Aguilar. I know we talked before about it's been 1 year, right, of decent play, but it was 1 year where they moved into the slot. And they at least, I think now, whether you think Aguilar can be saved or not, I think there's a very defined template on what he is, right, which is a slot receiver who can do some of the underneath trick stuff, the shallow drags, the jet motions, all that kind of thing. Can kind of run the ball a little bit with those extended handoffs. But I think he can be a legit slot option, particularly when you've got other quality receivers outside of him. So I kind of like somebody taking a flyer on an Aguilar. I think he would be pretty cheap given how badly things started to unravel in Philadelphia for him.
Not a bad thought there.
I would like that for them, and then obviously you look to the draft for the defensive, the defense.
So as far as picks go, number 6, they have 16 overall. They've got 2 second rounders and a third rounder. So as far as days 1 and 2, they've got a decent haul there. The Falcons. They're another team. They're middle of the first round. That'll match up with in our board, C.J. Henderson from Florida if you're looking at a corner. The Christian Fulton from LSU, again, if you're looking at corner. Do they go edge rusher again? They seem to grab a lot of first-round edge rushers from Vic Beasley, Tack McKinley in recent years. Is that an A.J. Epinesa place, or is that too high for him? I mean, they're not in a great spot as far as I think matching the value there.
No, I agree. It is a rough spot. I think they do need to take another swing at edge rusher, though. It's kind of it must be very disheartening for teams that have thrown a lot of resources at a certain position and find themselves still needing it there. And the solution to still needing it is to do exactly what you just did multiple times and failed.
So I think disheartening really, I've said this about the Falcons before, I think it sums up their roster, right? They're sitting there in 2016, they go to the Super Bowl, fantastic. 17, they still had a really good roster and underachieved. 18 and 19, still had a good roster and underachieved, but going into after 18, their offensive line, which was not a weakness for 3 years, all of a sudden they have to just fix it. And they fixed it in the draft to the detriment of all these other positions we're talking about because they had to put immediate resources into an O-line that they didn't have issues with previously other than a position or two. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, where are my defensive backs? Where are my edge rushers? We haven't been able to, replenish on defense.
Guy that I kind of liked but had a really rough 2019 was Bryce Hall from Virginia. I think he is sort of scheme specific.
Fit what they do.
Yeah. I think he would fit what they do. I think he also gives you, so he's scheme specific but in a kind of weird way, right? Like he's either a really good off-zone corner or press, which is a strange combination, right? Because
that's it, those two.
So anything that's like man but not press, we have problems, and anything that's like shorter zone stuff, problems. But in that scheme, I think he's really nice, and I think that fits a lot what they want to do because, if you think about what Richard Sherman does, he's up in press a lot, but a huge amount of it is then bailing to a deep third, right? So he's up getting aggressive in a guy's face, can cover sort of immediate routes, the immediate slant, or he can sort of give you that look and then bail into that deep third and cover that with his ball skills. So Hall had a fantastic grade in 2018. I think he was our number 2 graded corner.
Yeah, 90-plus grade.
That year. 2019 was ugly, but I think
and injured
right.
and all that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, ugly across the board, right? Every conceivable way. But I think he's a guy that, because of that, is going to slip and potentially is a perfect scheme fit for a team like the Falcons.
I don't know. I've purposely not known where the NFL feels about some of these guys, the Trevon Diggs and Jalen Johnsons of the world.
Yeah.
I feel like we might be higher on them just because of the positional value aspect, and a lot of these guys will be available in the second. I think if the Falcons come away with 2 corners in their first 3 picks, a first, a second, and a second, I wouldn't hate that as a strategy. Double up at the position if you're Atlanta. There we go, fixed-ish.
Ish.
For Atlanta.
Okay.
They're not that bad. They got Matt Ryan and weapons. They should be okay. Tampa Bay Bucs. Where are the Bucs going to go?
So
there's rumors that they're all in on Tom Brady.
I don't get that at all.
So I don't know if I'm just too skeptical of change for an older quarterback like that. But if I'm going to change Tom Brady, I probably don't want to put him in Bruce Arians' system where I don't see Arians changing. Arians never changed.
That's key, right?
Or the Gruden thing that I've mentioned before, which was more the terminology aspect of things.
Like that, yeah.
But that does matter. Terminology and play calling style and all that stuff. If you go to a stubborn play caller or head coach, I don't think that's going to fit what Brady wants to do at this point in his career where he knows exactly what he needs to do to succeed.
So forget Brady for the minute, right? Just confine yourself to Arians. You're right. I don't think Arians is going to change his scheme regardless of the quarterback that comes in, right? Which means you are now looking at a very specific style of quarterback that should work in this offense. And the most obvious quarterback that should work in this offense is Jameis Winston. And the idea that Bruce Arians seems to want no freaking part of that, despite the fact that he's heading into year 2 of this, which is where he would typically get the boost in, aligning all of these things and getting everything to play better than it's ever done before, that he doesn't seem to want to do that speaks volumes to me, right? But, so it's Jameis who's the most obvious fit to me. After that, who are the other quarterbacks that even make sense in this kind of scheme? It's like Tannehill if the Titans let him go, or who else?
That's it.
Well,
if they get into the draft,
so then
it's
you get
Justin
into the
Herbert,
draft, right?
Jordan Love. It's guys that
inherently are more risky.
Yes, I would.
Basically, what I'm saying is that almost every single one of the perceived top options, right, in quotation marks, whether it's free agency or the draft, all of the top options would appear to be fairly fundamental, bad schematic fits for what Bruce Arians wants to do. And yet he doesn't want the only one that seems to be a natural connection, or at least has made no indication that he wants it.
You can franchise Jameis, right?
You can. My point is, I don't know that they don't appear to want to.
I think I would franchise him.
Because they've been talking about franchising Shaq Barrett because you don't let sack leaders walk away.
Is that just a negotiation ploy?
No, I think it's genuinely he had 20 sacks, so we're not letting him leave the building.
So this is different from when I was saying, hey, the Trubisky thing, you can find Jameis Winston's and Marcus Mariotas all over the NFL these days. To your point, Jameis is the fit.
Yes.
Right? I wrote the article a few years ago. We've been talking about a few months ago, and we've talked about this for years, right?
There was a third quarterback I thought was a good fit. I tweeted about this the other day. You keep talking.
Jameis doesn't have to change as a player, and he could still have the high-end season. He could still have a top 10 season. Even if he doesn't change as a player, he keeps his normal, volatile style.
Cam
Newton.
Cam Newton's the only other guy that makes any sense, and you'd have to trade for that within the division.
Depending on what Cam's mobility is these days, he's Jameis Winston.
Yes.
There's not much difference. No, he's not exactly Jameis Winston. He will...
Stylistically, they are...
Stylistically, as in he'll chuck it down the field.
Yep.
He'll miss throws. He will not turn it over as much as Jameis.
He actually might be the best fit for that. But can you convince the Panthers to trade it to you within the division? I don't know.
I'm going to be writing about this actually for tomorrow. It's like, what do you do with the quarterback just from like an average depth of target standpoint? Like, do you tell him to be more aggressive or less aggressive? The Panthers tried to make Cam less aggressive, and we've always been don't do that.
Yep.
Right? If he went here, probably turns the ball over a little bit less than Jameis, and could, chuck it up to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and let those guys make plays and all that stuff. But Jameis is kind of the best fit, and if he just has the same type of year, a couple dropped interceptions here and there, a little bit more luck, you can stumble into it. Now you could stumble into a bad year too. The range of outcomes is wide, but I'd give it one more shot while drafting the next guy. That's what I would do if I'm the Bucs.
Because the other options are such a terrible fit. Like, I think Brady in that offense is not a good fit. I think Rivers in that offense is a disaster. I think Teddy is a disaster. They don't work. I don't see how you can come away with it without getting Jameis back. It's just they really don't seem to want to do it.
With the Shaq Barrett thing too, if teams could really take the high level, the 30,000-foot view of this, right? You sign Shaq Barrett, get some really nice production out of him, and then you let him walk and get whatever compensatory pick comes. Like that entire signing as a whole becomes valuable, right? If they end up, locking him up for 18, 20 million a year, it's immediately not valuable. I mean, because he's destined to regress and not live up to that money. But if you can treat each signing in this vacuum and say, what did we give up for him? What did we get out of him? And what did we get when he left? He could be a really valuable piece for this franchise. It's just uncomfortable because it's like, we just lost 20 sacks.
I mean, I will say that they might be in the same spot as the Giants that we talked about before, where it's, okay, Shaq Barrett will never justify a monster contract if you sign him to one. On the other hand, he is and always has been a consistently good pass rusher, and the Bucs have a ton of cap space to play with. Maybe they're a team that can say, all right, let's live with the fact that we're going to overpay this guy to secure a certain good player as an edge rusher. Because, they spent, the guts of a decade trying to put good edge rushers next to Gerald McCoy and couldn't. So maybe they say, screw it, let's overpay and make sure we don't let a good one leave the building. It's always tough to know that you're overpaying for something, but sometimes it might be worth doing. So for that perspective, I can see them. I wouldn't hate the move necessarily.
It's like you're making we've like reversed roles here. From last podcast, I was like, I'll overpay for these franchise tag guys. Whatever.
Yeah.
So I'd roll with Jameis one more year on the franchise. Let Shaq walk. I like what they've done in the secondary. Just continue to add playmakers, though. Receivers and corners.
I mean, maybe if you could get Jameis on the franchise tag. Jameis on a franchise. Yeah, but Jameis on the franchise tag and long-term lock up Shaquille Barrett for an overpaid contract. Maybe you front load it so it's a get out deal later on.
And then my favorite free agent signing, Chris Harris.
Yeah, you love
right?
That.
Chris Harris to the Bucs to pair with Carlton Davis and what's his face? Jamel Dean.
Offensive line
two big Auburn
in the
corners.
Draft.
Yeah,
you got to replace DeMar Dotson.
I would try to bring Dotson back on the cheap. That'd be.
You could do that, but I don't think he's been playing as well as he did earlier in his career. Plus, Donovan Smith still kind of,
Matt Parrott from UConn.
Uh-huh.
My favorite developmental tackle prospect. Only played the game for a few years. Has all the size and physical tools. Really productive at UConn. That's the guy I want, like late day 2 and into day 3.
All right, Bucs fixed.
Bucs fixed.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.